Morning, all. Oh. Morning. No, let's try again. Morning. Can you hear me?
Hello.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Right, just give me a moment.
Thank you, Brenda and Debbie, for your assistance with those numbers.
That's fine. It looks a different format.
Shouldn't have changed. It should be the same as it always was, but I don't know.
No, it's oh,
Okay, let
there
me
we are.
just do the live link and then we'll start.
Yeah.
Okay, 1 sec.
Happy birthday, Jeff. Hebrew birthday.
Thank you.
Yes, happy birthday, Jeff.
Thank you very much. Seems to have had a lot of birthdays this year.
Yeah.
Lucky you.
Long as it
When's your actual birthday?
Long
Do
as it
you
doesn't
get
get a year
present
older each
for
one.
each of the birthdays?
When was
Do
your
you get
actual
a
birthday,
present
Jeff?
for each birthday?
Just before she was, wasn't it?
My birthday was just before Shavuos, yeah.
Oh, right, okay.
It
Oh,
was
yeah.
after she was.
Yeah.
Whoops, okay. Right, okay. Oh, no. 1 second. Come on. Right, can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, Iris, you're on.
Okay, hang on, let me get it a bit bigger. Right. The name of the Parsha, Beha'aloscha, means when you ascend, and it is found in Numbers 8:2. Aaron is commanded to raise light in the lamps of the menorah, and the tribe of Levi is initiated into the service in the sanctuary. A second Passover is instituted in response to the petition, "Why should we be deprived?" by a group of Jews who were unable to bring the Passover offering in its appointed time because they were ritually impure. God instructs Moses on the procedures for Israel's journeys and encampments in the desert. And the people journey in formation from Mount Sinai, where they had been camped for nearly a year.
Another Passover.
Is that a Pesach Sheni?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. Well done. Sorry, I'm just sharing. Carry on. Yeah.
I can't carry on
Oh,
because
sorry.
I've finished.
Sorry. Right.
The people are dissatisfied with their bread from heaven, the manna, and demand that Moses supply them with meat. Moses appoints 70 elders to whom he imparts of his spirit to assist him in the burden of governing the people. Miriam speaks negatively of Moses and is punished with leprosy. Moses prays for her healing, and the entire community waits 7 days for her recovery.
Okay. Thank you. So we've got, besides for that, we've got the complaining, right, about the food. I think we may have done this year before, actually. It's Rabbi Sachs from a couple of years ago, but I think I was looking through the old ones and I couldn't find it. So anyway, you know, what's the old joke about the Israeli prime minister and the American president? The American president says, you know, it's very hard being the president of 250 million people, right? And the Israeli president says, try being president of 5 million presidents, yeah? So leading Jews is not easy. Spiritual leadership is not easy. And we all know that sometimes you have to put on a face for, you know, listen, anyone, a parent, a teacher, a rabbi, all different roles we have. You often have to smile and give the impression everything's okay, but there can be stuff going on behind the scenes. So this is not a new problem. Moshe Rabbeinu has this problem. You know, the people are complaining, they're kvetching, right? They're complaining about, they had all this fish and cucumbers and melons and leeks and onions and garlic, right? Never mind the slavery, they're busy, you know, it's very selective memory, right? And what does Moshe say to God? Right? Oh, I'll tell you when we did this. We didn't do this. No, we looked at it in a slightly different context. We looked at it in the context of, I think, depression and possibly even suicidal thoughts. It's quite scary what Moshe says, actually. He basically says, kill me, let's see. Right, source one. Who'd like to read source one?
I'll read it.
Go on.
Oh, it's changed.
Sorry, whoops, too quick. Right, go on.
Why have you brought this evil on your servant? Why have I failed to find favor in your eyes, that you have placed the burden of this whole people on me? Did I conceive this whole people? Did I give birth to it? That you should say to me, carry it in your lap as a nurse carries a baby. Where can I find meat to give to this whole people when they cry to me saying, give us meat to eat? I cannot carry this whole people on my own. It's too heavy for me. If this is what you are doing to me, then I have found faith. Then if you are doing this to me, then if I have found favor in your eyes, kill me now and let me not look upon this my evil.
Right, so it's Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatest leader of all time, saying to God, basically, I just, like people say jokingly, like, kill me now, right? Pretty extreme. Right? He says, I've had enough, I can't take it anymore. He says, I'd rather drop dead, basically, which we know is against everything Judaism stands for, but it also shows he's, if the therapists will look at it, or psychologists will look at this, they'd say Moshe was clearly depressed.
You blame him.
What's interesting also is that, with our understanding of mental health nowadays, is it Churchill, they say that he was severely depressed?
Yeah.
Now, obviously, there's a concern there in terms of Beden. Now they're saying maybe he's not in the best of health and whatever. So obviously there is a slight concern in terms of someone's ability to carry out their job. But equally, surely what this says to us is, I don't know if Churchill's leadership seemed to do a pretty good job as far as I could tell, whatever his mental health. So maybe the message here is that even the greatest leaders have
They do.
times when they just feel complete despair. So the way Rabbi Sachs puts it is, this always gave him hope, because basically, if you're having a bad day at work, right, as long as you don't feel as miserable as Moshe did, then you know that you haven't reached rock bottom yet. This is rock bottom. Rock bottom for a leader or a rabbi is you feel so miserable that you'd rather drop dead than have to face your people or whatever, or God. So that's pretty extreme. So are you a failure if you feel that way? Well, clearly not. Moshe wasn't a failure, right? So it's an interesting angle that it maybe you could say, I'm not sure this is about mental health, but maybe you could actually say he normalizes things for us. Even the greatest leaders have moments where they just feel complete despair.
Or maybe it's saying that he's, it's cliche, like normal, he's like any other person, that when things get too much for him, he just can't cope.
Right. The idea of take your own life and feeling that kind of despair, I think goes back, thousands of years. And Masada, and there's the idea of falling on your sword and this kind of thing. I don't know as much about the topic as I would like to in terms of my pastoral work, but there's always a discussion about when it comes to self-harm and people who have what they call suicidal ideation versus people who actually go and do things. So apparently it's not abnormal for someone at some point in their life to think, I wish I was dead. Like not that they're going to go and jump off a bridge, but you just feel that way. You just like, oh, life's not worth living type of thing. Evidently that the difference between that and someone actually harming themselves is quite a big gap. So if someone comes to their GP and says, I'm feeling a bit down, honestly, like life's not worth living, that would definitely be a red flag, but I'm not sure it'd be a huge red flag, because a surprising number of people at some point in their life may feel that way. So Moshe Rabbeinu feels that way. He says, God, life is not worth living. I don't think he's not being a drama queen. It's not hyperbole. This is how he feels, right? Is he alone amongst Jewish leaders in feeling this way, despair and life's not worth living? No, absolutely not. Let's have a look at some other examples. This is going to be quite miserable for a little bit, unfortunately. Actually, having dark, can you think of anyone else off the top of your head that we know had quite dark times and moods in their life?
Saul.
King Saul, absolutely. Anyone else?
Didn't is it Samson when he knew he was going to die? He had very
I think so. Yeah, last week's Haftarah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyone else? There's a few more I can think of.
well, Abraham must have had dark thoughts because he was willing to destroy his son.
Yeah, but I don't know if that not present. It's not presented. It's an interesting point. It's not presented that way. The other ones that come to mind are David as well, and times in Tehillim. We'll see. Jeremiah, the prophet of doom. Right? They tried to kill him.
Ezekiel.
And to be mad. So
Yeah, Ezekiel. I think Elijah. We're going to see a few. Jonah.
Yeah.
Right, Jonah.
Yeah, he said, cast me into the sea. It's bad
Yeah,
enough.
so let's just have a look at a few of these quotes. So here we've got, this is from Kings. This is Elijah, who would like to read. Anyone?
Yeah.
Go on.
He himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. He came to a broom bush and sat down under it and prayed that he might die. Enough, he cried. Now, Eternal One, takes my life, for I am no better than my predecessors.
Goodness me. What does that mean? I mean, we don't know the context. But again, he got fed up. Next one is Jeremiah. This, by the way, was much longer. I abridged it. There are about 20 verses of this kind of miserable melancholy. Who would like to read that?
I'll read that.
Go on.
Accursed be the man who brought my father the news and said, a boy is born to you, and gave him such joy. Let that man become like the cities that God overthrew without relenting. Let him hear shrieks in the morning and battle shouts at noontide. Because God did not kill me before birth, so that my mother might be my grave, and her womb big with me for all time. Why did I ever issue from the womb to see misery and woe, to spend all my days in shame?
So remember, he was the prophet of doom. He foretold the destruction of the temple. And I think in his lifetime, they tried to kill him because they didn't like him. So, but imagine this is a bar mitzvah speech. Bar mitzvah boy gets up and says, you know, woe to my parents. It's pretty miserable stuff. And these are leaders and
pretty
prophets.
desperate.
Very desperate.
Yeah.
Now, none of them did actually die. So that's good. Let's see what Jonah had to say. Right?
Wow.
Yeah.
Who hasn't read yet?
Eternal One, take my life, for I would rather die than live.
Right. Okay, so you get the general gist. And let's just go on to have a look at David HaMelech, Tehillim. Here we go. This is quite a famous, I think there's a song based on this.
Shall I read?
Go on.
My God, why have you abandoned me? Why so far from delivering me and from my anguished roaring?
Okay, so not quite as much misery as Jeremiah and Elijah, but still, it's very much like, you know, God, you know, you've given up on me, I'm helpless. It gets worse, though. Let's see. This one, of course, we say during the 10 days, right? Who would like to read this one?
Dog of ascents, out of the depths I call you, O Lord.
Right, we had that one during the 10 days of repentance. So it's a nice, on the one hand, we're calling to God from the depths. But again, what are the depths? The depths of despair. Right, and one more from Tehillim. Here we go, number 88. Do you want to carry on, Jeff? Go on.
Okay. I'll do it.
I am a helpless man abandoned among the dead. You have laid me in the lowest pit, in the dark, in the depths.
Right, so you study all of this, right? And someone comes up to you one day and says, I think you should become a rabbi, or maybe a prophet, or a leader of the Jewish people. You'll find it very rewarding, very fulfilling. It will give you a lot of pleasure and joy and geschmack, as they say in Yiddish. And you say, well, funny that, because I've been learning a bit of Tanakh, and actually it seems like a lot of them were depressed and quite miserable and basically quite morbid in their outlook on things and basically reached the depths of despair in their lifetimes. Actually, I think I'll pass on that, right? The only thing I can say, sorry, gone. Someone's going to say something?
No?
Yeah. I just had a thought that came to my mind when in the 60s they thought there was going to be, the bomb was going to drop on you any minute.
Right.
Say, oh, we shouldn't have any children because we're bringing them into an awful world. And it reminded me, well, what you're talking about It's the same type of feeling that people had then. So nothing changes.
Right. You just right. So why so much despair? So the short answer is the same reason that we might feel despair nowadays. We hear the news, and we have high points, of course, but we hear the news, particularly from Israel or just generally. We look at society, whether it's physical safety or whether it's spiritual assimilation, and we just feel pretty miserable. And Rabbi Sachs suggests that the reason for that is because trying to effect change is a fundamental Jewish value. We don't accept the world as it is. So therefore, if you're a prophet, or you're a rabbi, or you're a Moshe Rabbeinu, or you're King David, then you look at the world and you feel despair because you want to change the world, and it's not happening. That's the reality. So you feel despair. It's not the first time Moshe felt this way. Let's have a look earlier on. This is what they said earlier in Shemos. Who'd like to read? Iris, I think we're back to you.
Okay. If only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots and ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into this desert to starve this whole assembly to death.
Now, interestingly, Moshe didn't react to that in the same way. He didn't basically have a whole drama, whatever, make a whole drama out of it, right? This whole drama comes up in this week's Parsha when he says, I've had enough already. I've had it up to here. So how come he didn't sort of react at that point? So you could say that was early on. Maybe it filled up his stress bucket, whatever they call it. But also on that occasion, they were hungry. They needed food. It was a legitimate concern. Right, what happens in this week's Sedra? They've had the Torah at Mount Sinai. They've built the Mishkan. They've come closer to God than anyone in history. They've got the manna. What are they moaning about now? They're complaining. There's not enough choice on the menu, basically. It's a ridiculous complaint. It's just ungrateful. And he says, I've had enough of these people. We're trying to build a world of godliness, and all they can do is they're just moaning and complaining and giving him a hard time. I've had enough of it already. That's when he kind of hits rock bottom. Interestingly, he hits rock bottom when it's perhaps unjustified. So it's almost when they were complaining because of slavery or whatever, Moshe could take that. It's when it's gratuitous. It's when you're just trying your best to make things better, and and to have a good life and to live a spiritual life, and everyone's just moaning. Moshe says, I can't take it anymore because this is just pointless. Now, God does comfort him. What happens next? God tells him, first of all, and it's not the first time he gets told this, don't shoulder the burden of leadership all on your own, right? Who was the other person that told him that previously?
Father-in-law.
His father-in-law.
Exactly, right? One second, I missed the quote, sorry. Just one sec, going to skip that one. Right, his father-in-law told him that. So God says to him, gather the 70 elders and share the burden with them. Don't worry about the food. We'll get meat, we'll get quails. And what happens after that? After that, Moshe basically seems to bounce back. That we have this, if you actually look at the Parsha, he seems to basically have a sort of, a second wind, a change of direction. There's a few things that happen. So first of all, there's the famous story in this week's Sedra, which I absolutely love, which again, Rabbi Sachs talks about, the story of Eldad and Medad. Right? Remember who Eldad and Medad are?
In the desert, I can't remember. No, no, sorry, can't remember.
Yeah, go on.
I thought I'd got it.
No, I think you're right.
No, I can't remember what I was going to say next.
So Eldad and Medad were left behind. I can't remember exactly why. I think they'd done something naughty, if I recall correctly. They were behind when everyone else went to gather manna, I think it was. And they were going around saying Moses is going to die and Joshua's going to take over, and we're prophets and we're prophesying in the name of. And Joshua got very upset, partly because they were saying Moshe is going to die, but also because they were asserting their, they were acting without authority. And Joshua says to Moshe, you've got to put a stop to this. And Moshe says this famous line, right? Let's see. Here we go. Would you like to read, Iris?
But Moses said to him, are you wrought up on my account? Would that all Hashem's people were prophets, that Hashem put the divine spirit upon them.
Right. So there's a wonderful, wonderful share from Rabbi Sachs a few years ago, which I've quoted many, many times. He speaks about the difference between power and influence, right? Contrasting Korach and this week's Sedra. So Korach wants some power, and they all say no, and the earth swallows him up. Eldad and Medad are going around prophesying, I think they say. And Yeshua says this is terrible. Moshe says this is great. You know, the greatest form of flattery is when your students follow in your footsteps. So what's the difference? Rabbi Sachs says the difference is power versus influence. Power is a zero-sum game. If you give out power, you lose power, right? Absolute power. But influence, like a candle, you light another candle, you simply increase the light. So to influence another person, it's the greatest compliment is that they should basically carry on. You know, someone say, "Oh, I hope you don't mind me quoting your Dvar Torah. Are you crazy? I'm delighted. Oh, Rabbi, I hope you don't mind. I quoted your sermon. Someone, are you crazy? That's fantastic. I'm so glad you remembered it, right?" But it's interesting that after this incident where Moshe hits rock bottom, he suddenly bounces back. He becomes quite chirpy. So Joshua says, "Oh, you know, these people are going around and no one gave him permission." He says, "Don't worry about it." He says, "It's great. We should be a nation of prophets." And then again, also, right, when Miriam and Aaron start criticizing him, and then Miriam gets leprosy, and Moshe prays on her behalf. And at that point, the Torah says Moshe was humble more so than any other human being on earth. So look what's happened here. He's had this crisis. He's hit the bottom of despair. God comforts him. He lifts his spirits. He gives him the 70 elders. He gets him to share his woes, right? And Moshe bounces back. He becomes suddenly quite chirpy, quite, sort of youthful.
You got it.
So what's going on here? Right, and we can look at the other examples as well as to what lifted people out of their despair. But let's look at Moshe for a minute. 1 minute, he's in the depths of despair. He's crying out to God. God comforts him, and it lifts his spirits, right? So one thing you might ask is, Moshe wasn't stupid. He had a direct connection to God. He knew the people were quarrelsome. What, you have to wait for God to come and give you a plan? Why don't you just use your seichel, right? Yeah, psych yourself up, use your seichel. But you have to wait for God to come and show you. Obviously, all is not lost. Use your seichel. So what's the answer? The answer is the Talmud tells us this. Right, who would like to read number 12? It's an interesting piece of Talmud. Who hasn't read for a bit?
Okay, I'll read it again.
Go on.
The Gemara answers, they say, a prisoner cannot generally free himself from prison, but depends upon others to release him from his shackles.
Right. So you can't be the problem and the solution necessarily, right? I would, by the way, extend that and say we all know that, you can be a doctor and, your family can be ill and you're the worst person to treat them. And you're definitely the worst person to treat yourself, right? I mean, I said tongue-in-cheek, not tongue-in-cheek. I mentioned in my sermon, but it's really true that, my kids respond better to other people, encouraging them to daven and lay. And it's a funny thing, there's certain things that sometimes it's better coming from another person, right? Sometimes you need a critical friend to say to you, you're not looking after yourself, right? And you say, well, I'm not stupid. I'm an adult. I'm self-aware. Well, you're not looking after yourself. You're not getting enough sleep, or, you're not eating enough or whatever, and sometimes you need a critical friend. It's something I spoke about, something Mendel touched on as well. This idea that when it comes to how we help each other out, when it comes to our emotions, as opposed to our intellectual qualities, you need other people around you. This is the power of connection. This is what we learned from COVID lockdowns, how important it is to have connection, right? A prisoner can't release himself from prison, meaning that you need someone else to help you. You need someone else. That's why we have so many mitzvahs, right? That we're told that when you celebrate Yom Tov, you have to include the widow and the orphan, right? Yes, we're told that you have to visit the sick, that you have to comfort mourners. You have to, why? Because these are things that you need someone else to help you through. Right? It's the same with leadership. God says to Moshe, you're not on your own. Right? I'll create a hierarchy for you. You can have help. But I'm with you as well, says God. And that gives him a lot of comfort. Sometimes just being present, what is it they say? Just being present is very powerful. They say when you're sitting with your spouse or an old friend, someone, you can sit in silence and it's not uncomfortable. Right? People feel they have to fill the silence. Sometimes you go to a shiva and you feel like you have to say something. So you start jabbering about the weather or something. But if it's someone you're very close to and you know them well, sometimes you can sit and it's absolutely fine. Because just being present knowing that you have. For Moshe to know that he's got the 70 elders helping him out is already part of the cure. The other point is that we see that failure and despair is a normal thing. Like someone said earlier, Moshe's a normal person. That we should, we all go through points of despair, I'm sure, at some point in our lives, sometimes at unusual times. When it comes to mental health, sometimes some people are phenomenally successful in areas of their life, and yet they're struggling with mental health. There have been a few cases lately of people that, some of which very high profile, particularly unfortunate people have taken their own lives. People said, after I don't understand, this was someone who was very happy, very content, seemed to be doing very well, very successful. This wasn't someone who had hit rock bottom. And yet still, a person can unfortunately hit rock bottom. So we should know that it's perfectly normal. And it doesn't say anything about failure. You're not a failure if you hit rock bottom, unfortunately, or if you feel despair. It's a normal feeling to have. The greatest of our leaders felt despair. Sometimes that despair came out of their leadership, right? They wanted to change the world. They wanted, they couldn't. But it also shows us it normalizes it, which some people might say is very healthy. When William and Harry were talking about their mental health problems, writing their books and whatever about it, this was, people said it's very powerful to have it's one thing for, I don't know, for me to say, we all suffer from mental health or whatever, but for people who are perceived as, I don't know, privileged and, surrounded and cocooned, saying actually, we also suffer from, mental health problems. It's normal. It's normal. So I don't know if we should label mental health on there. I think we could actually. Yes. We're talking about mental health. It's despair and feelings of failure. Definitely. So person should realize that even if you feel your self-esteem's gone and you feel like you're a failure and you feel complete despair because everything's going wrong and your leadership's not working or your job's not working or your family's not working, you should know, first of all, it's quite normal. The greatest of the great felt it. Maybe that's Moshe's humility as well, is realizing that. And the good thing is that when you realize that, it's a lot easier to come through it, because when a person realizes, right, or someone helps them to come through it, as we said, you can't really release yourself when you're in a spiral. When a person realizes that this is normal and it's okay, and you reach the depths of despair, someone else can help you out of that. In Moshe's case, it's God or the 70 elders. It's actually a very powerful thing. So Rabbi Sachs says maybe that's the whole idea of humility with Moshe. Because it takes humility to recognize that we're not perfect and that we all feel sometimes despair or rock bottom, and that's okay. So, a person never feels like they're a failure. Remember, Moshe Rabbeinu also thought he was a failure. He turned to God and said, I'm a failure. Take my life away from me. And interestingly, after that moment, when God comforts him, he basically has a new lease of life and he's bounding around all over the place. So perhaps you have to hit rock bottom to achieve that. So there's different messages from it. One message is that we all suffer from these things. The other is that, the greatest of the great. It's a certain humility to recognize. Doesn't matter who you are, you can go through these things, these feelings of despair. And it's okay. It's okay to feel that way. Anyway, there we go. It's this week's share. A little bit depressing, but hopefully there's a positive message that it's okay to have those feelings. And the greatest of the great sometimes thought they failed. So it's not even the most privileged, and the greatest leaders of our people often felt despair. And as we pointed out, some of that despair just comes to the fact that we look around the world and there's sorrows and there's problems and things are not as we want them to be. And that alone is a reason to be a little bit miserable. Yeah. Any thoughts?
I think if man in general didn't have ups and downs, life would be, pointless, really. You have to have the ups and downs to make you appreciate the good times. Surely?
Yeah.
So you have to appreciate everything. And if you sailed along quite happily, I think you don't appreciate the good things.
That as well.
Yeah.
I suppose there's how you relate to like kind of yourself and your own struggles, and then there's those who have responsibility for others, leaders, prophets, kings, feel a particular despair often on behalf of their people or whatever. Yeah.
Sorry?
No, I'm saying there's a difference also what you feel for yourself like a person just feels despair for whatever reasons, you're going through challenges. And if you're in a role of leadership and you feel despair, you're a teacher and the kids are not getting it. You're a rabbi and no one's listening to you, or that's a whole different dimension. That's Moshe Rabbeinu's issue. But then you start to doubt your you feel like it's a personal failure, basically. But that's the reality, people talk a lot about numbers and successes, and no, people don't talk about their failures. They don't put on social media when no one showed up for something. Rabbi Leitner came a few years ago. I don't know if you remember, but I think quite a number of years. I think when we were first here, maybe 2016, Rabbi Wilson and I organized a joint pre-Pesach thing in our shul, and some people came from, it was then Clay Hall, and some people came from here. I think we had about 30 people. Rabbi Leitner came, and Maureen Kendler came, and somebody else, I don't remember. Maybe not. Somebody else came. Maybe Rabbi Wilson gave a talk. Anyway, I was quite embarrassed by the numbers. And I said to Rabbi Leighton, I'm sorry, you've got 2,000 members between the two shuls or whatever it was. And, this is the attendance we got. And he said, listen, he said, believe me, he said, I went to Radlett last week, we had a dozen people. You don't hear about this, you only ever hear about the big, you never hear about the protest where 3 people showed up. But you hear about the protest where 10,000 people showed up. And it's funny also, it all depends who you ask, right? So the people protesting will tell you there are 100,000 people there, and the police will say actually there are about 10,000. So you don't hear about the failures. That's the problem with social media as well. You don't see when someone's having a bad day, right? So you would think that all these people that you see all over, they have such a great life. I don't know, Kardashians or whoever, I don't know, Princess of Wales, whatever. You don't see when they're having a bad day because they don't post that, right? Basically.
Oh, what's going on here?
Right, we finished quite early.
Oh,
Rabbi,
Yeah.
a depression. I'm afraid, can you get in touch with Jill and Nick Levine? Because
Yes, good idea. 1 second, let me stop recording because you don't have to put this out on Facebook. Yeah.
Yeah.
they were talking, they can hear.